So I've been diagnosed with back-to-school sickness. It includes a mild cough, less free time, and as a result, less time for me to talk about stupid things in games. Time is something that we all experience. Time is something that we have ingrained in every aspect of our lives. The time it takes you to watch a video, the time it takes you to listen to music, the time it takes to travel and cook dinner, and even the time that it takes for a Minecraft YouTuber to stop messaging some of their fans. God, I love this stuff. What? Oh, I don't care for the clock, I just love the concept of time. Fun fact, I've been a fan of time since day one. Don't believe me? I'd like to return to the fetus image once more. Ah, look at him. Experiencing seconds turn into minutes. He was ahead of his time, let me tell you. No baby had more experience than me than when it came to existing in time. I'm an absolute time menace. Okay, also a time menace. Look, it goes well with the pasta, lads. Lads, time is fucking great. I need to find out where I can experience more of this stuff. What else can I do that involves time? One of you better fucking explain yourselves before I get violent. Games. I love them. If you expected otherwise, I'd say I'm sorry to disappoint, but really I think you need to invest in some better foresight because what did you expect? And you know something about games? They all take time to complete. Find me a game that the average time enthusiast wouldn't be able to identify as a time use case, I dare you. Much like life, time is everywhere in games. And much like life, some games need to use time as a part of the experience, so let's take a look at what games take inspiration from my list of favorite things. Starting with one of the best insults I've ever received. So, am I taking the idea of time as a mechanic in games too literally here? Yes. So this is about as much as a time mechanic could get. We literally have a timer that is telling us how much time we have. And there's way too many games that use this for me to want to even bother listing examples. I mean, every fighting game, shooter, even battle royales to an extent have something counting down, letting you know that there's a finite amount of time left in the match that you're playing. Even in games that could theoretically go on forever, there's a timer that's here just doing the opposite. But these examples are a little bit boring by themselves. What happens when the mechanic of time as a resource runs out? Or put better, how does the game change as time begins to run out? Well, the game ends. There we go, video done. I'll talk to you next time. Nah, we're not doing that. In multiplayer games like these, the timer adds tension, which naturally builds as time runs out. Now, in some games, what I said earlier is the only case. Time runs out, game ends. Pokemon VGC, Pokemon Unite, fighting games, CSGO and Valorant, trading card games, even fucking chess. In all of these games, if there's no time, there's no game. But there's a mechanic which throws a wrench into this idea while amplifying the tension even further: overtime. Overwatch, Paladins, and Marvel Rivals are the three games I know best that use overtime, but recently my Paladins has been opening its anti-cheat 3 times trying to boot up and then crashed, so I'm just not even bothered trying to get some extra footage for that, so we'll just focus on Overwatch and by extension Marvel Rivals, but only in concept. Now, is overtime basically just an amped up version of the timer that I was on about earlier? Yes, absolutely, but it's different enough in its function and has given me some of the most engaging moments while playing Overwatch, so I want to discuss it a bit. For those unaware of how overtime works, to sum it up quickly, touch the point with 3 seconds left in the round and overtime will start. It stays active while the objective is contested, effectively acting as a second timer. There's a short window that decreases as overtime continues, where the objective can stay uncontested, and if that runs out, the game is over. This lets tension run even higher, and in certain matches can make a win feel even better than it would have before or after the release, or it can have the opposite effect and make the tension release after a loss feel even worse, but hey, you're the one playing a competitive game, you did sign up for this. Obviously, overtime doesn't work in every single game. I mean, could you imagine something like overtime in Guilty Gear? How'd that even function? But in games where it does fit, overtime as a mechanic is a great way to amplify your tension and build up to release. Of course, there are other reasons that it's a good mechanic as well, but I'm not here to discuss combat mechanics today. I'm here to talk about clocks and cocks, and speaking of, Stardew Valley. So while overtime is one way you can mess around with a timer, why not just have a timer in general? I mean, it can work perfectly fine as a resource and as a means of adding to your attention and release. I mean, CSGO and Valorant have a perfect one with a bomb. We've all had to experience a defuse with 0.2 seconds remaining. It can even be used as simply a means to panic the player, which in certain cases may not be what you want, but when it's intended, it works incredibly well. Just look at the Okumura boss in Persona 5. You can absolutely beat this guy in less than 30 minutes, but just having the existence of a timer puts pressure on the players to not only win, but to win quickly. But where does Stardew come into this? Well, it has one of my favorite examples of a timer, entirely thanks to your character passing out if it's 2 AM. You can't do anything to avoid this. The EB Sleepy is inevitable and it will consume all. Well, if you're normal, this 2 AM cutoff point doesn't exist, If you're like me, the mines are your home, and trying to sprint home from them and get into your house just as it hits 150 in the morning is a skill that makes you feel superhuman upon mastery. Minor exaggeration, but hey, Stardew is a good game, you should play it. While a good build-up and release is a standard in a lot of games and a timer is a great way to implement it, it's not going to be the best in certain cases as well. Let's jump back to the Persona 5 example from earlier, the Okumura boss fight. Thematically, a timer is solid here. You need to stop Okumura in 30 minutes before his rocket launches, but 30 minutes is way too generous. The timer comes in, makes players panic, and then they beat the boss in 10 or 15 minutes. The difficulty in this boss comes from its enemy wave gimmick rather than the actual timer, but the timer adds an artificial layer of difficulty because people think they only have so much time left and start to make rash decisions. Now, in fairness, I do love this boss fight for that, and if the intention for a timer is to add some stress, then I see no issues at all. But if your timer is going to be largely aesthetic and only add stress instead of giving a satisfying build-up of stress into a relaxation release, I would question if it's the right call. With Okumura, after players beat him in the 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes it took them, the release after the build-up just doesn't hit in a satisfying way, at least in my opinion. I was just kind of left thinking, that's it? Why is there so much time left? But this largely depends on who's playing the game, because to some it will make no difference at all, and to others it could be a thing that leaves them feeling unsatisfied. It's hard to strike the right balance in this type of situation, and before I'm done with timers, I want none of you to bring up the new Super Mario Bros. Series timers. Those don't count, they're not real. All these timer examples of time being used as both a mechanic and a resource are a little bit too on the nose. Let's try a different avenue of time in games. Day-night cycles. It's an extender of timers. It's an extended version of timers. It's extended timers. It's like, just what do you want me to say? I mean, you know, they're great for aesthetic. If you want to make your game feel a little bit more alive, having it swap from day to night is going to be great. That's definitely one way to go about it. It can also be restricted so that certain events only happen at certain times of the day. I mean, we're all familiar with monsters only spawning in at night, you know. Stuff like that is pretty commonplace. We're all used to it. And of course, it adds realism, but honestly, I find that it's a little bit too similar to all those timers that I just discussed a moment ago, and it's also been discussed at length by way smarter people. You should go watch Design Doc they make. Design Doc makes great stuff. So let's get a little bit more spicy with our time mechanics, shall we? Let's start manipulating time. So, time manipulation. Yeah, we aren't starved for examples here, so we may as well start with one of the oldest ones that we have. Just the entire existence of this game. I don't need to explain Majora's Mask to you, you know how it works. 3 days till the world ends, travel back in time as Doomsday keeps closer, keeping certain items with you. But what's really cool about this to me is the fact that you won't reset the clock just to get more time before the moon kills you. The game has a clockwork schedule. NPCs and quests come and go depending on the day and time. So you want to manipulate time to your advantage so that you can access them. Okay, look, lads, look, alright, see, I know that I look like the randomized character for someone in The Sims, and that I also make mini video essays, but that does not mean I'm about to spend an hour talking about the genius of a Zelda game that has existed since before I was even a concept. So let's move on from time manipulation games to time manipulation characters. And the first place I want to start with is Fire Emblem Three Houses, because this is the only Fire Emblem game I've fully played, and it's also the only one with Marianne, so therefore it's the best one. Is the time manipulation in this game just a method of making it more welcoming to newcomers by giving them a Control Z button for when they make a mistake? Sentence is over. I don't think that's a bad thing, just don't hit the button if you don't like it is my own set of thoughts on it. But if we ignore the context of Violet's time powers because I don't want to acknowledge Sothis, we have a solid return to the past to fix a mistake mechanic. Personally, I love this, especially since it was my first Fire Emblem game. It helped me get into the series by lowering how punishing it can be at times. But I also find it fits the best thematically out of all the times that Fire Emblem has had a rewind mechanic. It's also relatively balanced because you can't just spam rewinds to try and reset the RNG roll. You have to change the action you're making before the previous one if you're trying to manipulate it. Time manipulation in single-player games is something that I could go on about for ages. I mean, any time loop game like Deathloop or 12 Minutes where you're stuck in this Groundhog Day style of time looping around can be seen as a form of time travel. And I mean, you've got Ocarina of Time trying out timelines, and there's loads of games I've not even played yet that actually show off time travel in a pretty cool way as well, like Chrono Trigger. But what about adding some time manipulation to multiplayer? how does the mechanic play out in a player versus player environment? Not as cool as you'd hope. In a multiplayer setting, time manipulation is beyond a tricky thing to try and implement to the fullest degree. Could you imagine a game where one player had the power to just rewind the lobby back 60 seconds, or even just pause the entire game? Typically, in games like these, time manipulation as a mechanic is restricted to one of two possibilities. It's either focused entirely on the character, or if it can affect other players, there are heavy limitations. To start with the first example, let's look at everyone's favorite time-traveling lesbian, Tracer. So most obviously, Recall. It rewinds Tracer to where she was 3 seconds in the past. It's kind of in the name. It'll restore her health to whatever the highest point was in those 3 seconds, and it also grants her a free reload. This is a classic example of time plowers for a multiplayer game. You can head 3 seconds into the past. Wonderful, beautiful, I love it, give me 14 of them right now. Her other ability is only time manipulation in aesthetic, however. She just blinks forward. And this here is a theme you'll notice with a lot of time characters. Certain abilities are only related to time just because it fits their team. Taking Zillion from League as an example as well, specifically for this case, his Q, E, and ultimate. His Q pauses enemies in time if they're hit by 2 of them, which is just a stun. His E either slows down an enemy or speeds up an ally under the guise of speeding up or slowing down time, and his ult? Well, that's just a revive or rewinding time. Now, in fairness, Mr. Time Wizard does have a cool time ability with the fact that he can reset his own cooldowns, and that he can also accelerate the growth of his teammates' experience, but listen, it's not really that cool all in all, but it is the best that we're going to get with a time character in a game like this. But I will say, Deadlock actually has an example of a really cool character that has a time-related theme, Paradox. Now, I've had some choice words about Deadlock in the past. I don't think it goes far enough with its concept as it could, but that doesn't matter here because Paradox is cool as shit. Sure, one of her abilities is just a slow for enemies, but what's important is her third ability. First, look at what happens before it's even used. She enters bullet time. You can use this to stop your momentum mid-dash to surprise an enemy. It can be used to hang around in the air, and it's not something that any other character or theme could replicate. She slows down time for herself only. You can't get a bullet time effect on any character without them having some kind of time manipulation present. And it doesn't just end there. The actual shot that it fires applies a time stop on enemies, slowing all of their actions. And I have to say, I love the concept of her wall. It doesn't act quite as a barrier, but it shields her from bullets for just a few seconds by slowing down the travel speed of the bullets. They do speed up again, but it's just such a cool way to implement this type of mechanic. Think about it. A slow effect can be applied in any way. An electric shock, spraying someone with ice, getting punched in the face, or even just getting shot. It's not exclusive to a time manipulation character, but this is. The bullets just don't get blocked like how a shield would if you use that. You can't break the time wall, and it could be argued that it's better than a shield, depending on the circumstances. There's no other mechanic that could slow down the speed of bullets, which is why I find this so cool. It's such a unique way of adding time control elements to a character in a PvP setting, which just makes it a real shame that one of her other 2 abilities is just a move speed slow, and then her ult is a positional reset? I mean, the position swap ult is cool by itself, but in a time character, I don't know if it matches as well as it could, but honestly, with how creative the other 2 abilities are, I could never complain. So as I was streaming gathering footage for this video, a certain character was brought up to me. Atlas from Paladins is the time wizard of that game, so forget about what I said about Paladins earlier, we can deal with this mid-long opening time. Atlas is cool as balls, lads. Why has no one ever told me about this character before? He's so fun. This is such a cool time character design. This is amazing. Just to start with his abilities, we can ignore the E as it's just what Paradox has going, except it destroys the projectile, so let's just actually start with his shift, second chance, and it's just another rewind, is what I would say if he wasn't fucking cool as hell. Atlas is a tank, so this rewind acts as a cool form of self-sustain, and there's an extra piece that I'm leaving out. His first talent, Unstable Fissure. If any enemy is near Atlas when he rewinds, they also get rewound. This is just sick. You can rewind enemies to before they got healed. You can rewind them out of your backline. Of course, you need to be literally touching people and using, your own cooldown of a rewind to send people further back. That's not really ideal. So fuck it, you also have a rewind projectile. And one of your other talents, Deja Vu, can swap it from being a single target projectile to an AoE bomb. I have, in all honesty, fallen in love with Atlas, entirely because of his rewind mechanic extending to more than just him. I had a game where I rewound the enemy tank to when they were at about 5% of their HP. He's so fun! His ultimate is also a bit of a cooler way to go about a stun with a time character in my opinion, mainly because he doesn't stun you normally. It's described to, and let me be clear about the fact that this is a direct quote, banish enemies from this plane of existence, which means after being ulted, enemies cannot be interacted with by anyone. You basically just send them to a different timeline for 4 seconds. I mean, that's way cooler than a normal stun. Don't even try and argue with me, honest. Atlas is a time character done extremely well in my opinion, and the main reason for that is the fact that his manipulation powers affect both him and enemies in a way that doesn't feel like a cop-out. I mean, to return to League for a moment, it kind of shows us that himself and Paradox are more like exceptions to the rule rather than standards. If you look at Echo, I mean, his ultimate is literally just every rewind that has ever existed, except his can actually do damage to people. His W will either stun or slow enemies, again under the guise of time, and of course his Q, Time Winder, is the exact same, and then his E is just a blink forward through time. It doesn't really have any actual time-related elements to it, aside from the rewind. That is, however, if we only stick to his League version. 2x KO Echo is what I would like to say, except that game wasn't released in my country, so I didn't get to play it yet, so we can just kind of talk and look at it. So, in 2x KO, Echo has 2 primary time-related mechanics. He can rewind himself to a previous position. Beautiful, amazing. We already know that this type of stuff is cool. But what I really like is his actual time slow effect. His Time Winder special slows enemies down, which you'd probably wonder, why are you praising this? It's a slow. You just mentioned how boring slows are in a time character earlier. But that is where one important thing changes. In a game like League, Overwatch, Deadlock, if a character is slowed, it's generally only their move speed. They can shoot fine, they can use other abilities just fine, they just aren't as fast as they normally would be when they run. But Echo in 2x KO actually slows the time of enemies down, the same as Paradox like I mentioned earlier. Look at their fall speed, they're damn near floating, and this happens in other fighting games as well. Roman castles and Guilty Gear also slow down the time of enemies, though it's different in each game, and I have only played Strive since it's the only one with Giovanna. To stick with the fighting games though, there is Bayonetta in Smash, though I don't think I want to traumatize anyone who played Smash 4 competitively, all 23 of them. So we'll spare the details, as that in concept is the same as the Guilty Gear and Echo examples, just broken. I've only seen these types of proper time slows within fighting games and, well, whatever the hell Deadlock is meant to be with Paradox, and I just love their concept. Their execution is a different story, we don't speak of Smash 4, but when trying to implement time mechanics into a PvP space, these types of proper time slows are by far some of my favorite. They're the most creative option I've seen that works in a way that doesn't break the game or the character. The important thing when it comes to time manipulation characters to me in a multiplayer game is how do they compare to the rest of the cast. If they've got slows and stuns, which is just a slow and a stun under the guise of time, I'll put it bluntly, it's kind of boring. The time slows that we see with Paradox, 2x KO, and even the other fighting games I mentioned like Guilty Gear and to an extent Bayonetta, we won't speak about her though, are they're just cooler. They're just cooler ways of going about a slow. Yes, it may just be a slow effect, but it's got a cooler twist to it. Imagine if a time character had something like Breath of the Wild stasis, like you pause them in time and then any damage you deal to them will only be dealt when they're unpaused and it'll pause them for like a second or something. Would it be balanced? Probably not. Would it be fun though and more interesting than just a regular stun? Absolutely. I mean, with Atlas, we saw a different way that you can go about having a stun in a game that will be under, the aesthetic and guise of time, but that actually feels like just more than a regular stun. I love the fact that he just literally banishes you from this plane of existence. It's just a cool way to go about it. He effectively kills you for 4 seconds or however long you're banished away, which is it's just cooler than, ha, you're stunned. I just think any method to add a twist to it is just more interesting. While time powers would be the first thing that people think of whenever time in games is brought up, outside of single player, it's really hard to implement. Multiplayer games just can't go that far with it unless they think outside the box, but even then, they still need to place limits on themselves. I mean, you can't have a character do anything to do with the future unless it's going to be something like just blinking into the future, which is effectively just a dash because, well, you can't exactly manipulate the future in these types of games. And actually, speaking of the future, what do I need to do tomorrow? Am I bringing up calendar systems just an excuse to talk about Persona some more? Not entirely. Just started when Fire Emblem Three Houses have one as well. So, am I stretching the definition of time in games? Not really, but I'd say it's getting a little bit tight. A calendar system it's just fucking nice, isn't it? I don't know what you want me to say, man. Games get a little bit more alive when they have one, especially when they fit well. Stardew's changing seasons are my favorite addition to the calendar. The events are cool as hell as well. I mean, I'm the best egg hunter on this side of the farm, but the changing seasons really adds to the farming simulator aspect, which is, the main point of the game. Persona, on the other hand, handles events in a much cooler fashion. I swear I'm not biased at all. maybe a little less. Different social links, jobs, and extra bonuses from activities or shops, even the state of enemies during combat will be different depending on the day. Of course, it also helps play into the game's double life aspect, but look, I've spoken about more than enough Persona today, and you all already know why the calendar system works so well in it. It meshes into every aspect of the gameplay, it's a core part of the game. But how do you go about not implementing a calendar system? Three Houses, as much as I love it, has a calendar system which is nearly entirely superfluous. Events like birthdays, choir days, or group dining sessions will be sprinkled throughout the months, but there's only one playable day, being Sunday. The rest of the week always proceeds automatically, and at the end of each month, the story progresses. With there being about 4 of these days off a month where you can do extra battles and side quests, spend time with the characters around the monastery through supports, meals, a spa trip, or training, and then you can hold a seminar to increase character skills, or you could just do nothing. I mean, doing nothing will repair some durability on your main weapon, but why would you do nothing? Well, this calendar tries to give the game a greater sense of immersion by having you live through Byleth and their schedule. Since you only gauge with about 4 to 6 days each month, it doesn't grab you in the same way that Persona or Stardew can. It's a small blemish on an amazing game, which does show that a calendar system isn't something you can just throw in. A lot of planning and different activities are needed if you want to bring forward that sense of days going by in a way that feels meaningful, rather than merely an attempt at chasing what works in other games. I love these types of systems, and again, if that surprises you, some foresight is really needed. Have you seen how much Persona I've talked about today? So while the idea of time in games is beyond broad, it's also a definition that I can stretch extremely thin. Let's take a look at timelines, and I assure you, these are not the kind that you're expecting. Rune King, a League of Legends story. I love this RPG. Even if I didn't play League, I think this game is incredible. And part of what I love about it is how its combat functions. There's a timeline at the bottom of the screen, which shows you when party members and enemies will get their turn. And I did tell you that the definition was being stretched here. You can change your position by swapping the lane that you're in, trading attack power for speed, or vice versa. But of course, my favorite aspect is how you can influence the timeline. Enemies can be pushed back. Allies can be brought forward in a way that really rewards planning ahead. You could push enemies back so they don't actually have a turn before Alawi absolutely demolishes them. This isn't a unique concept to Rune King. I do know that there are other RPGs which use this type of timeline system in order to influence the turn order. It's just that Rune King is the only one that I've played that uses it, and I adored it so much I had to bring it up at some point. Seeing how developers want to implement time into their games is something that I just find really interesting, because time is something that we all experience. Time is something that we have ingrained in every aspect of our lives. The time it takes you to watch a video, the time it takes you to listen to music, the time it takes to travel and cook dinner, and even the time that it takes for a Minecraft YouTuber to stop messaging some of their fans. So what did we learn today? Well, turns out I've actually been talking about timeout games at 4 AM instead of 4 PM, which means I've discovered what a noise complaint is. Alright, we're gonna do that again, except I'm gonna go short. How? How the fuck does that even? Oh, for fuck's sake. I was gonna, this is gonna fuck up everything. For fuck's sake.